Welcome to TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers, a program of educators worldwide. I'm your host today, Robin Miller, and joining us is Dr. Pankaj Mehrotra. Pankaj is an instructor at the University of the People in California. He's currently based in the New Delhi region of India, and he's going to speak to us today about learning spaces. So welcome, Pankaj.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and it's a pleasure to be at TTLT Talks.
Okay, so how about if you start off by telling us exactly how would you define a learning space?
A learning space is a space where the interaction happens between students and educators. And the learning spaces are of three types. The in-person learning spaces, so-called as face-to-face learning environment, the online learning spaces, where the two types of learning environments has involved, asynchronous and synchronous, and hybrid learning spaces, where both the online and the face-to-face learning happens. The learning spaces further are of two types, the major and the minor learning spaces. Now let us just try to understand by visual aids what are the major and the minor learning spaces. So if you're able to see my slides, you will see that we have two types of learning spaces being involved, which are called major learning spaces and minor learning spaces. The major learning space would require the interactions to happen between the students and educators and students. On the other hand, minor learning spaces will require the interactions to happen between students and educators. Now, all of these learning spaces, whether face-to-face, online, or hybrid, will have major learning spaces and as well as minor learning spaces.
Okay, how do learning spaces affect student engagement?
Yes, the main purpose of the learning spaces is to create engagement between students and educators. The two types of online learning spaces are asynchronous and synchronous learning. In asynchronous learning, the interaction happens between students and educators without live instructions. And in asynchronous learning, the interaction happens with the help of live instructions, like we are in this environment at the moment. Now, I would like to introduce with you some of the major and minor learning spaces in the asynchronous learning environment. If you're able to see the slides, in an asynchronous learning environment, the major learning space and a minor learning space is a discussion forum. In this forum, the engagement of the students happen, and as well as students and educators. And in a messages or an email format of learning, the learning spaces have been characterized into minor learning space, which requires the interactions between the students and the educators. On the other hand, some of the minor learning spaces are the learning journal tab, the quiz, and as well as the written assignments. Now, the other type of learning space is a synchronous learning space. A synchronous learning space is a space where the interaction happens with the help of live instructions. And we have several spaces within the synchronous learning environment. For example, the Zoom main room, the breakout room, and as well as the Zoom chat. Now, let us look how the synchronous learning environment is divided into the major and the minor learning spaces. In the synchronous learning environment, the Zoom main room acts as a major and a minor learning space. That means the interactions will happen between educators and students. and students. On the other hand, the Zoom main chat box would act as a minor learning space, allowing the interactions between the students and educators. And finally, when we use the Zoom breakout room, the major learning space evolved, requiring the students and the educators to both interact with each other.
Okay, could you summarize your main points? What would you like us to take away from your talk today?
Yes, so there's a need to proactively integrate the major and the minor learning spaces in your courses and as well as classroom activities. Now, let us just look at what are the major differences in the major and the minor learning spaces in an asynchronous learning environment. For example, the learning is collaborative and personalized in a major learning space of an asynchronous learning environment. On the other hand, the learning is personalized and non-repetitive in an asynchronous minor learning space. Both ESL and the non-ESL students are benefited in a major learning space, but in a minor learning space, the non-ESL students tend to interact more with the educators than the ESL students. Further, in a synchronous learning environment, the learning would happen in a very different way. So let's just look at the benefits of the major learning space in a synchronous learning environment. The learning is less collaborative in a major learning space. On the other hand, in a minor learning space, the learning is personalized and collaborative. The learning can be repetitive, but for short and long duration. The learning is repetitive, but for short duration in a minor learning space. So these benefits are for both the ESL and the non-ESL students. The non-ESL student interact more with the educators than the ESL student in a major learning space of a synchronous learning environment. But the ESL student interact more with the educators, but also with the students in a minor learning space. Finally, I would also like to give you a summary of how the major and the minor learning spaces have been benefited to both the learning environment, the synchronous and asynchronous, and as well as the in-person and the online. So online education can be offered both synchronously and asynchronously. The learning spaces are going to be more beneficial for the non-ESL students and the ESL students. The learning space in a synchronous environment favors more ESL students than the non-ESL students, and the virtual learning environment is more suited for the heterogeneous learners than the homogeneous learners. So that's the more of insight on learning spaces. Again, the learning spaces are the spaces where the interaction happens between students and educators. We have to select the best possible major and minor learning spaces on the type of courses we are delivering to students who are in person and also online.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of today's interview. I want to thank you, Dr. Pankaj Mehrotra, for talking to us about learning spaces.
Thank you so much, Robin, for this opportunity to share my insights on learning spaces. And I'm sure the participants and the audience would love to have them integrated in their own courses and classroom. And I'll be very happy to provide further feedback and personalized learning and how well they can identify their own major and minor learning spaces in their own institutions.
Okay, Pankaj, if people want to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to contact me is via email, and my email address is my first name dot my last name at universityofpeople.edu.
Okay, perhaps when we get this uploaded online, I can go ahead and add that as a comment. So if you're interested in contacting Pankaj, check the comments after you finish viewing. So thank you again, Pankaj. My name is Robin Miller. I've been your host today for this broadcast of TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers, a program of educators worldwide. I invite you to leave comments, share with us if you're using any of our teaching tips, and please, you can also leave a voice message and contact us also on ttelt.org online. Follow us, like, and subscribe on social media.